Hi guys, welcome back to Health Decoded. I'm Alex, I'm your nurse. Today we're talking about the menstrual cycle, something that at least half the population deals with but ultimately affects all of us in one way or another. To understand the 28-day cycle, we need to understand the anatomy of the female reproductive system and the hormones that drive the cycle. Hopefully, this will help to make everything make more sense to everyone in an approachable way and maybe even potentially reduce any stigma around the conversation. So let's dive in. So, starting with the anatomy, always got to start with the brain. She is the control center. So, we have the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, which communicate with the ovaries using hormones. So, we're going to see this come into play a lot. The hypothalamus and the pituitary are really important, and ultimately, it works on this axis. So, it's called the HPO axis, and it stands for hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. So, all terminology aside, these three things are just communicating with each other to regulate the hormones to have this cycle happen continuously. Moving to the actual reproductive system, like in the female body. So, in the pelvis, if I'm sure most of us have seen a diagram or a photo of some kind of the female reproductive system, and it looks like a pretty little T, and you've got the ovaries sitting on the side. It doesn't look like that. If you were to cut the body in half, it's like all compressed down in there, just like squeezed in your pelvic cavity there. Um, just to give you some perspective. So ultimately, we have the vagina, which connects with the cervix to the uterus. Then from there, the fallopian tubes are going to kind of tee out. And then the ovaries sit right at the opening of the fallopian tubes, but they're connected on their own. So some diagrams show this better than others, but that's why I say it's all compressed on each other. So the vagina is the canal with which the menstrual blood flows. The cervix can change positions and also mucus consistency in response to these hormones. The uterus builds the lining to help support pregnancy, so it's full of blood vessels and everything to help support should a fetus be implanted and grow. The fallopian tubes are what transport the egg once it's released from the ovaries, and the ovaries have follicles on them which actually release the eggs, and the ovaries also do a lot of work in producing estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so that's the basic structure of it. Getting into more of the hormones themselves, in simple terms, we have four that really matter. We have estrogen, progesterone, FSH, which is follicular stimulating hormone, and then LH. So the hypothalamus releases a different hormone, GnRH, in pulses. The pituitary responds by releasing the FSH and the LH. And these two hormones tell the ovary to mature an egg and produce estrogen and progesterone. It's this modulation and fluctuating of all of these four hormones that create the menstrual cycle. So, breaking down what each of those hormones do, estrogen builds the uterine lining, supports mood, supports cognition. Estrogen has such an impact on the female body, and we'll talk about that in the estrogen episode. Progesterone stabilizes the uterine lining, supports pregnancy. It has some calming effects. It's also really important. FSH, so follicular stimulating hormone, it stimulates egg development. And then LH, luteinizing hormone, triggers the release or the ovulation of that egg. So these hormones rise and fall in a ideally predictable pattern throughout the cycle. And there's graphs that you can see online. I will try to attach one below in the info section on YouTube. But if you have the chance, go check out one of those graphs because it really makes a lot of sense when you see how it's all lined out with how everything's rising and falling. So, getting into the actual cycle itself, I like to start with the follicular phase instead of the menstrual phase. a lot of diagrams or a lot of people will talk about it and they'll actually start with the menstrual cycle. And for me, it just doesn't make as much sense to start there. So I like to start with the follicular phase, moving through to the ovulatory phase, and then ending ultimately with the menstrual phase, because I think it helps to make more sense to break it down that way. But ultimately it's all cyclical and it all wraps back around in on itself. So it doesn't really matter where you start. But I think it helps to make a difference in outlining if pregnancy were to occur after ovulation. And I think it helps to signify like why menstruation is actually happening. So I'm starting with the follicular phase. This is days 1 through 13. And this is when your estrogen is rising. So during this phase, the GnRH is releasing in pulses. These pulses increase. The pituitary releases the FSH, which is the follicular stimulating hormone. So it's telling the ovaries or telling the follicles in the ovaries mature an egg and produce estrogen, because we need these levels of estrogen to start increasing so that we can support and promote this process. So as the estrogen rises, the uterine lining is going to build, and we're also going to see serotonin and dopamine increase as a result. So key symptoms that you're going to see during your follicular phase leading into your ovulatory phase are going to be energy spikes. So you'll feel maybe more open or curious to like, you'll feel like going out more with your friends, or you'll have better mood or more energy. This is a phase where, ladies, if you work out or you lift, you know you're going to have your best lift. Yeah, so you're just going to see better mood, mentation, energy overall. You'll be more focused. So this is really creative time. If you're on projects or something like that, this is where you're going to really feel like you're locked in. Maybe you have better sleep, but ultimately you're going to start to notice as well with this energy increase, an increase in your libido, because as we near ovulation, that's going to gradually increase. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. So moving into ovulation, estrogen is going to be at peak. This is around day 14. I like to look, well, I mean, it's not just me, but it's the cycle. Ovulation and menstruation in the cycle are at opposite ends, okay? So 14 is for ovulation, and then ultimately the end would be menstruation, which is why I like to look at it this way. So when estrogen reaches the high enough level, it triggers an LH surge, so luteinizing hormone. This causes a release of the egg from the ovary, so that is then going to travel through the fallopian tube, ideally where fertilization would occur, and then that fertilized egg could implant in the uterus and grow. This is your most fertile time. This lasts about 24 hours for the egg, but there's a bit of a window of a few days around because we want to promote sperm survival should that fertilization occur. So we'll notice cervical mucus will change. It'll start to become a little bit more clear or stretchy, basically helping sperm travel. Again, we want to promote fertilization in this phase. Well, the body does. You might notice an increase in your basal body temperature. There's actually something called Mittelschmerz, if you've never heard of it. It's similar to period cramps. So when that egg is released, you'll actually experience cramps sometimes. But ultimately, what you'll experience, ladies, further increased confidence, more social engagement, more improved mental mood status, mentation, XYZ, and then again, increased libido. Higher estrogen levels often increase your sexual desire because evolution wants to continue. She wants you to use this environment that she's created for you. So she wants this egg to be fertilized. So she's saying, go out and use this thing that I've just created for you. So this is ultimately where I like to see this, like, kind of conceptualize, like this split occurs. So after this egg has been released, it all determines on if it got fertilized. So if the egg didn't get fertilized, now we move into this last half of the cycle of menstruation. So if the egg was not fertilized, where the egg was released from the follicle, that actually turns into the corpus luteum, which helps to signal more of these hormone releases for this last half of the cycle. So this helps to continue building the uterine lining for hopes of implantation, but should that not occur, it starts to break down. So the corpus luteum starts to break down, estrogen decreases, because ultimately when we're pregnant, we need higher levels of estrogen. But if we're not gonna be, then we don't need those levels of estrogen and progesterone. So these levels start to fall. And this is why we then eventually get to menstruation. So if you're looking at charts, you're gonna see estrogen come up, 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 and then start to drop, and then progesterone start to also taper down as well. Essentially, the main idea is that the system has to clean up and clear out and do it all over again for the next month. So again, luteal phase, your key symptoms, think PMS. So all of these hormones have reached their peak and they're starting to come down. We're going to see decreased energy, maybe increased appetite cravings, or start to notice bloating, breast tenderness. All of these symptoms are going to be particularly more towards the end, but it's as these hormone levels are decreasing, because the body didn't need what it just did all this work for with creating the egg. This then leads us to menstruation. So menstruation begins when estrogen and progesterone drop. This drop triggers the uterine lining to shed, it removes hormonal support from the body, and it can cause bleeding and cramping. So low estrogen can feel like fatigue, brain fog, increased pain. Low progesterone can feel, well, it removes its calming effects. So when the progesterone is low, it removes the calming effects, and it can in turn increase irritability or anxiety. So a lot of your key symptoms are explained from all of this: cramps, bloating, breast tenderness, maybe acne, digestive issues even can all come into play. Essentially, the menstrual phase is a reset phase. Your body is recovering from the work that it has just done throughout this whole cycle so that it can start over and do it all over again. So, the key takeaways from all of this: hormones pulse and release at different levels, which influence different phases throughout the cycle. Essentially, the ovary wants to grow and release an egg for fertilization. In order for that to occur, the pituitary releases the FSH and the LH for the egg to grow in the ovary and then release through the fallopian tube for fertilization. But should that not occur, the follicle that released the egg turns into a corpus luteum, which then reduces the need for estrogen. And then as these hormones drop, the uterine lining will begin to shed, thus resulting in the menstrual flow. Knowing all of this and how it works can help us to understand what we are experiencing in each of these phases and in the cycle overall. So as a result, I would hope that this would help to make symptoms better manageable for you, or more easily manageable for you, I should say. But ultimately, this isn't about controlling your body or shaming the experience. It's just about understanding it. So my nursing tips for you for easing your menstruation, ladies: ibuprofen and naproxen are particularly good for cramps and headaches, but use the over-the-counter medication that works for you. These anti-inflammatory medications reduce the inflammation that is occurring from these hormone changes. We can also do heat, so a warm bath or warm compress can help to soothe cramps and the tightened muscles that you might be feeling. Dietary changes are really important as well. High fiber foods can help to ease constipation, can help to kind of flush your system. Go watch the fiber episode, that might help make more sense. Staying hydrated is really important. This helps to reduce any excess sodium that's in the body. It helps flush that out. It can ease cramps because proper hydration of the muscles, again, flushes things out. Dehydration worsens fatigue. So water helps to transport oxygen and nutrients and can actually keep your energy levels up and improve things like your focus and your mental state. So good options for that would be herbal teas or caffeine-free teas, or a hydration or an electrolyte supplement would really help as well. Eat iron-rich foods to replenish the blood that you are losing. So foods like spinach or leafy greens or lean meats, if you eat them, are good options. Reduce your sugar intake, salt intake, processed foods. We always want to reach for the tasty items. So I'm not saying don't satisfy your cravings, just be aware of the intake of them because it can actually make some of your symptoms and side effects worse. Gentle exercise and movement, such as stretching or yoga at this time, can really help. Also, massages can help reduce pain too. Ultimately, when we think about this, the uterus sits in the pelvic cavity and it's growing, and it's essentially getting inflamed. And so this uterine lining is shedding, and that's causing this movement and these cramps. So you're feeling bloated and you're feeling cramps and you're feeling all of this compression down there because the uterus has literally swollen some in your cavity there. And so it's getting compressed and that hurts. So this is why hydration and heat and stretching and all of these things can actually really help. And ultimately why things like the antiplatelets and the anti-inflammatory medications like ibuprofen can help to reduce that as well. Ultimately, just rest. Listen to your body. Rest when you feel tired. And this goes for your mental state as well. Your body is doing some things, and that is okay. Don't beat yourself up for it, okay? So, I hope this helped. In closing, we covered the menstrual cycle today, its phases, how it affects us, because ultimately this does affect all of us in one way or another. So, if this episode helped to clarify some things for you, I hope it did. Please share it with somebody. If you have any questions, you can always comment below or email them to me. I would love to hear them. I will see you guys next week for our next episode. As always, like and subscribe, and thank you for listening.